Good evening and welcome to Scotland at 7 here on Broadcasting Scotland. My name's Kenny McBride and I'm joined this evening by two of our favourite guests. Firstly by Andrew Wilson from All Under One Banner. Andrew, how are you this evening?
Kenny, I'm doing well. How are you this evening?
I'm alright. And Sam, how are you? Sam Paton from the Save Loch Lomond campaign. Sam, how are you?
I'm doing fine. How are you, Kenny?
I'm well. You seem in a very good mood. So, well, I'll start the news now and that'll probably bring you back down. We start, as we always do, with our coronavirus statistics update. And as of 2 p.m. today, a total of 263,600 people in Scotland have been tested through NHS Scotland labs and UK Government regional testing centres. Of these, 245,341 were confirmed negative, 18,259 were positive. There are 8 new confirmed cases of COVID-19 today, and sadly there is 1 new reported death of someone who's tested positive. This will of course be an underestimate of the total number of cases, as not everyone with the virus will display symptoms and not all of those will necessarily be tested. Of the people who have tested positive, there were 439 people in hospital last night. 5 of those were in intensive care, with 12 more in intensive care with suspected COVID-19. The number of patients in Scotland who have died from complications caused by the coronavirus infection now stands at 2,486. This number only includes those who have died in hospital, having received a positive test for the virus. And the latest UK daily figures available show that 43,906 patients who tested positive for COVID-19 have sadly died from their illness, an increase of 176. This number refers to deaths in all settings, not just those in hospitals. And as it's Wednesday, we have our NRS report. So as at the 28th of June, 4,155 deaths have been registered in Scotland where the novel coronavirus was mentioned on the death certificate. Between the 22nd and 28th of June, 35 deaths relating to COVID-19 have been registered, a decrease of 14 from the previous week. This is the 9th weekly reduction in a row and the lowest weekly total since mid-March. COVID-19 deaths accounted for 3% of all deaths registered in week 26. This has fallen from its peak in week 17, when COVID-19 deaths accounted for 36% of all deaths. And from the 22nd to the 28th of June, the total number of deaths registered in Scotland was 1,006. This is a decrease of 59 from the previous week. The average number of deaths registered in Scotland in the corresponding week over the previous 5 years was 1,026. This is the first time since week 13 that the total number of weekly deaths has fallen below the 5-year average. And over the 15-week period from the 16th of March to the 28th of June, the number of excess deaths, which is the total number of deaths registered minus the average number of deaths for the same period over the last 5 years, was 4,906. So that is where we stand with the statistics today. Now, if you do want to join the conversation this evening, you can do so. Follow us on Twitter at BroadcastScot and then join the conversation using the hashtag Scotland@7. That's hashtag Scotland, AT and the number 7. And we will be flashing those some of those tweets up on screen during the show, as you can see on screen right now. But our first story this evening, ratings agency S&P Global cut its UK forecast for the year again today to an 8.1% contraction and warned of a perfect storm next year if a post-Brexit EU trade deal is not agreed. S&P, which delivered its first ever double-notch downgrade to a AAA rated country when Britain voted to leave the EU in 2016, said it no longer assumed the Brexit transition period will be extended this year. Instead, it expects London to strike a core free trade deal starting in 2021, though the risk that negotiations fail remains elevated. A second, bigger wave of infections in autumn, then followed by a switch to WTO trade rules in January, would be a perfect storm, S&P said. And Andrew, this is something we've talked about for a long time on the show, but following yesterday's failure to even request an extension to the terms of the transition period, we are now looking at a deal or no deal definitely by the end of this year. Standard & Poor's seem to think that there will be some sort of deal in place. Are you as confident as they are?
No, Kenny, I'm not at all. I think it's pretty clear, for example, from the tweets we've seen this week attributed to Mark Francois, the small but noisy Tory MP, that no deal was very much always the intention of the ERG and the Bruges Group and the other Brexit jihadists who have annexed the Tory party. And so I think at the very best, we will see a very thin and very poor deal. And I think it is far more likely, as evidenced by the refusal to even contemplate or to consider the options around an extension, I think it is far more likely that we're heading for a no deal.
Mm. And Sam, before I come to you, there's another wee story I wanted to bring up here. Banks and insurers in the UK must fully embed their approach to dealing with risks from climate change in their business by the end of 2021, Bank of England Deputy Governor Sam Woods said today. There are some areas of our expectations where few barriers exist to full implementation, but we recognise that challenges remain in others, Woods said in a letter to heads of banks and insurers. Where challenges exist, we will work closely with firms to understand how they are seeking to overcome them. And this issue of when the Bank of England is saying, guys, we need to really focus on climate change now, it shows that climate change is not something that we can really afford to put off anymore, and that this is going to be just another factor in this potential perfect economic storm that Standard & Poor's was talking about, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. It's putting it all together. You have got the perfect storm, and it's all going to come to pass around about the same time within the same period. But yeah, when the Bank of England starts saying about climate change, then climate change is really serious and it needs to be taken serious. So yeah, it's worrying times, as we were saying even in last night's show. We're entering into kind of worrying territory at the moment, and especially with the deadline passing regarding an extension with Brexit as well. I agree with Andrew. I really don't think they're interested in getting a deal with Europe. They're going down the path of no deal. That's very apparent. So yeah, we are entering dangerous territory at the moment.
Mm-hmm. And Andrew, I mean, this transition period, the point of it was to help us have room to implement a deal. Even if a deal is done now, it's going to be September, October before the terms are agreed, and then you're looking at only 2 or 3 months as we go into winter for businesses to actually make the preparations. Do you think that's even possible?
No, I don't, Kenny. I was thinking a little bit, before I answer that point, I was thinking a little bit further. It doesn't. I'm not surprised that the S&P giving a downgrade on the UK economy. I am, however, thinking that as the ratings agencies start to do that, those who hedge and trade against currencies and against economies and who look to profit from large movements in the financial markets, I'm thinking of people like Rees-Mogg, for example. This is exactly what they want. So I'm sure that they are toasting these kind of announcements tonight as it is now. With regard to the question you just asked me, I'm acutely aware that Scotland is now, albeit in COVID circumstances, the holidays have started here. The holidays will start in England with a giant party on the 4th of July next week. And France and Germany and the rest of Europe is on holiday for August. So you've lost 2 months already. So the conversations are not going to start until September. And to try and achieve any of these things in 16 weeks is impossible, flatly impossible. Any agreement is going to be a couple of pages of loose intentions, and that's it. And that doesn't cut it for businesses who I know from my conversations have no further guidance and are beginning to realise that it is unlikely that they will receive any further guidance before the year is out.
Well, speaking of institutions criticising the UK government, the UK should consider increasing its unemployment benefits to help people get into the kind of work that is likely to be in demand after the coronavirus lockdown, the chief economist of the International Monetary Fund has said. Geeta Gopinath told MPs today that the first priority for governments was to gradually scale back their support programmes for workers affected by the COVID-19 crisis, including state job retention schemes. Then, as governments seek to get people back to work, the focus should be on reallocating resources in the labour market, or moving people into jobs where demand will be strong, which would initially increase reliance on unemployment support. In the case of the UK, you could make a case for temporarily increasing the support under that because the UK has one of the lower replacement rates among advanced economies in terms of unemployment insurance, Gopinath said. Britain's job retention scheme currently covers more than 9 million jobs, equivalent to around 1 in 3 private sector employees, and is due to expire at the end of October. Chancellor of the Exchequer Rishi Sunak is due to spell out the government's next moves to support the economy on July the 8th. And Sam, this is, the International Monetary Fund saying to the British government, you might be a wee bit hardline right wing here. This is the kind of criticism that you just don't expect to see Britain receive. What do you make of this from the IMF?
A wee bit, I would say a big bit. But yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, they're right. They're too hard line. They need to see about increasing benefits because at the moment we're seeing so many people being made redundant and losing their jobs, and that's just with COVID. What's it going to be like when Brexit hits? Especially when businesses are not getting any support, there's going to be a lot more coming. And that's going back to the perfect storm. So people, in order to get back into work again, they need more support. The benefits do need to be increased because what you find is as life slightly changes, at the moment, you're already seeing the cost of living going up. I mean, I know yesterday when I went shopping, you're already noticing the price of food and things already kind of starting to rise in prices. So people are already going to be starting to feel the pinch pretty soon, if they're not already. And I mean, look at the weather outside. I mean, it was not so bad when the sun was shining and and things, but now that it's very dreary and it's dreich and it's a typical Scottish summer, and people are going to be using electricity more, they're going to be having the heating on, so money is going to become quite tight very quickly for people. So if they are trying to get to job interviews or trying to make sure that their phone bills are being paid or their mobile phones constantly topped up so they can make calls regarding finding jobs, it's going to be very difficult. So it just makes common sense, increase the benefits. Yeah. Better still, universal basic income.
Well, I was just going to say to Andrew, this idea of the IMF that increasing unemployment benefits makes it easier for people to get into better jobs. That does make a very strong argument for something like a UBI, doesn't it?
It absolutely does, Kenny. We know that after so many years of dogmatic austerity, even before we got to COVID and the threat of Brexit, that the benefit and support received by citizens in the UK was, by international comparisons, low, and we know that it has continued to remain low, notwithstanding the various platitudes that the current Prime Minister has expressed about improving people's circumstances. So we know that as a matter of austerity, taxing and hammering the poor was the very foundation of that policy, and it's not changed. And the furlough scheme, I think it's clear from its breadth and its depth, was an admission, in a sense, that there are very significant and serious problems in the structural jobs market, which mean that people are not being paid enough to live on and are not being paid enough to make progress on, and that again also has been as a matter of political choice and political policy, with an economy based on 0 hours contracts and offshoring and outsourcing responsibilities, and the continued deindustrialization of our country. And so the challenges that arise from the dogmatic approach, which is we will punish people for being poor, I think actually the scale of the furlough programme proves that point. And I think if it's not recognised quickly that what the IMF are suggesting is correct, that very quickly, as Brexit appears, you will see the kind of reaction that there would have been on the streets if the furlough schemes hadn't been introduced. But across the whole range of benefits and support, from benefits to widows, to pension scheme, the whole range of the social structures that and safety nets that were built up over 40 or 50 years have been abandoned. And as a result, it's not a surprise that international monetary organisations, not international pressure groups for pensions, international monetary organisations, even they are raising their eyebrows and are indicating their surprise and their concern at the implications of several years of UK government policy.
Mm-hmm. Well, we do have another somewhat linked story. The SNP has challenged Boris Johnson over his failure to deliver any new money for Scotland's recovery, following his underwhelming relaunch speech yesterday. Speaking at today's Prime Minister's Questions, Ian Blackford challenged the Prime Minister over whether Scotland would receive any new money at all from his so-called recovery plan, which amounts to just £5 billion of recycled money. Johnson failed to give any figures but made a commitment that the consequentials would be outlined next week in the fiscal statement. The SNP Westminster leader said the Tory government's plan was devoid of action, devoid of ambition and devoid of any support for the most vulnerable in our society, and paled in comparison to the £80 billion recovery programme proposed by First Minister Nicola Sturgeon and huge investments being made by countries like Germany. Mr Blackford added that the Tories were setting the UK up for a two-tiered recovery, leaving the most vulnerable behind, and called for a U-turn on the reintroduction of Tory benefit sanctions. Sam, this will have come as quite a shock to a number of people who are claiming job seekers or the equivalent through universal credit. They were told today that sanctions are back and that you can now be sanctioned if you're not doing enough to find a job. Given the state of the job market, given that some people still aren't allowed to go back to work, what do you make of this from the DWP today?
Basically, it's unworkable. It's ludicrous. I was watching Boris Johnson this morning just before I switched over for the Daily Briefing, and he just seemed so disinterested when Ian Blackford was speaking and asking him the question. He's just absolutely, honestly, such an arrogant man. But however, I'm just really concerned because at the moment, they're saying that sanctions are back. So does that mean job centres are opening back up and people need to go back into job centres for appointments and such with? Because if that's the case, how are people meant to do that? And people might go, of course they can, public transport, X, Y and Z. But the thing is, there's a lot of restrictions on public transport right now. Mm-hmm. Some of the buses have got, a limit on how many passengers they're allowed to take. So if people have, like some my area, have got to use public transport to get to their closest job centre, what do these do if the bus then drives by the bus stop? They're going to be late for that appointment, therefore they're then going to be sanctioned. So there's a lot of kind of practical things but then again, Westminster don't care. All they care about is they sanction people and they save money on because they're not having to pay out that benefit. And therefore these people have then got the added stress of trying to find money to pay the bills, try to find money to buy food. But they don't care about the bigger picture. All they care about is this being able to... I think the sanction system is deliberately set up that at some point anybody who is claiming these benefits is going to be sanctioned. There is no way around it. Even if you're in hospital, they sanction people. When you miss an appointment or you don't... people are being sanctioned. It's just absolutely a ludicrous system. And the thing is Westminster don't care. They really don't care. And at the end of the day, the DWP are going to do as they're told from Westminster if they say start thinking the sanctions. Yeah. Are these people allowed to use their own discretion that in this circumstances, under certain circumstances, they can turn around and say to people, we know there's not a lot of jobs out there. There's more and more people getting paid off.
Yeah.
You can't travel properly because the bus, even the train system for down our neck of the woods is not back to full capacity. Yeah. The trains are still not running properly in the mornings. So how are people meant to go for interviews? How are they meant to go for jobs? It goes back to that question. If the benefit money is not adequate, how they meant to do these things.
Yeah.
It's just a vicious circle.
Yeah, Andrew, this announcement that Boris Johnson made yesterday is urged to build, with £5 billion of money that's not even new money, just recycled from other departments that maybe weren't spending as much because of the crisis. It's really not enough to kickstart an economic recovery, is it?
No, it's not even close. I'm not even sure that this is money recycled from savings in other departments. I think these are announcements that Johnson made round about the general election last year, and he's just trotting them out again. I think that's why it's clear that there are no consequentials no Barnett consequentials for Scotland in this, because the money's already been announced. This is not new money at all. So that's bad enough. That the amount of money involved is and this sounds like the wrong thing to say, but in comparative terms, it is so infinitesimally small. HS2, I think, is £85 billion, I think, so far and counting. So the notion that £5 billion is going to create very much of anything is ridiculous. It just doesn't stand up to any scrutiny whatsoever. And so the notion that he's going to create any kind of revolution out of such a token and parsimonious amount of money, firstly tells you that he's not serious about it. Secondly, he's only bothered about the headlines. Thirdly, he knows he'll get good headlines in his section of the press. And fourthly, he doesn't care about other people and the consequences that they are suffering, both of a long period of Tory austerity and then COVID and Brexit on the horizon as well.
Well, we move now to the Middle East, and Israeli annexation of the occupied West Bank might be weeks away, a government minister said, as a start date of today for cabinet discussions of the move slipped by in the absence of a green light from Washington. Israeli leaders decided in May that cabinet and parliamentary deliberations on extending Israeli sovereignty to Jewish settlements and the Jordan Valley in the West Bank, in coordination with the US, could begin as of July 1st. But with no agreement with Washington yet, on the practicalities under the supposed peace proposal announced by President Donald Trump in January, and talks with the White House still underway, no cabinet session was scheduled for today. I think that it will happen in the coming weeks or months, but I am not versed in the details, Energy Minister Yuval Steinitz, a member of Benjamin Netanyahu's right-wing Likud party, said about annexation on Israel Radio. Palestinian leaders, the United Nations, European powers and Israel's Arab neighbours have denounced any unilateral territorial steps planned by Israel and consider settlements it has built on land captured in the 1967 war as illegal. Netanyahu has made annexation a focal point of his fifth term in office in what some critics see as an attempt by the right-wing leader to deflect attention from his corruption trial, which began in May, and to enhance his political legacy. He has denied charges of bribery, fraud, and breach of trust. Andrew, if I could come to you first here. This supposed deal that Trump announced back in January was immediately rejected by just about everybody involved in the process. Everybody, I think, except Israel, rejected it out of hand, said this can't possibly work. And yet we seem to be just edging closer to things just happening without negotiation, without the agreement of the international community. What do you think is going to be the outcome of this if Israel does press ahead with full annexation of the West Bank?
Well, I think one aspect is that it would appear on the evidence that you've been talking about just now that yet again President Trump is acting as a cipher for another right-wing or rather more extreme politician elsewhere in the world. It's pretty clear that Trump is a cipher for Vladimir Putin, and here he is acting as a cipher for Netanyahu as well. And we know that in circumstances, so the point is that the failure of the US administration to do anything around the time when Netanyahu was intending to begin to implement his plan tells us that there is no plan in Washington apart from to curry favour and act as a cipher for other more extremist leaders around the world. As for the results that are going to happen that may unfold as a result, as I understand it, the annexation plans are particularly and precisely set out in a way that is particularly destructive. What I mean is that they are not, as I understand it, the annexation plan is not to annex a single area on a border with Israel. It is to annex plots of land and areas of land scattered throughout Palestine in order that the Palestinian state, if it was possible to set it up, would be so shackled and so unable to operate that it would be permanently in a state of crisis. We know that in circumstances where the Palestinians and others have found themselves on the wrong end of expansionist or difficult or dangerous Israeli policies, that inevitably armed conflicts follows. I think at the current moment that a significant escalation of violence in that part of the world, one would expect it would very easily turn into another small proxy war. There are still proxy wars running through the Kurdish territories and through northern Iraq. There are still proxy wars being fought in Yemen and the Saudi borders, and so here we are. Here we have another front, the risk of another front opening up, as a result either of the President of the United States not understanding what he's doing, or his slavish adherence to the whims and wishes of another despot elsewhere in the world, or the connivance and planning and the determination by, or as you say, a right-wing administration in the State of Israel to continue to attack and damage the interests of the people of Palestine.
Mm. Now, Sam, today in the biggest selling newspaper in Israel, Boris Johnson, of all people, had an editorial saying that the annexation plans had to be scrapped. The French foreign minister has said today that annexation would have to be met with consequences. Do you think some of this saber rattling from the rest of the world, from Britain, from the EU and various others, will have any impact on Israel? Or do you think President Trump's support is enough to see them through?
I think Trump supports enough to see them through, by the sounds of things. They've not gave any kind of thought to what other countries around the world have thought about this. They've not gave any consideration, should be the phrasing that should be used. But yeah, I mean, this is designed in particular to cause chaos in Palestine and to the Palestinian people. This is what this is designed to do, and it's as if it's designed to goad them into, whether it's, entering another war, or it's just designed to create chaos. It really is. This is not designed to any peace. Anybody that thinks this is going to be a peaceful process coming from Israel is deluded, because when you see the way these annexes are set up, that's not peaceful. That is chaos.
Yeah. Well, we move now to another part of the world where, with disputed territory, the United Kingdom said that China's imposition of a security law on Hong Kong was a clear and serious violation of the 1984 Joint Declaration, and that London would offer around 3 million residents of the former colony a path to British citizenship. Hong Kong police fired water cannon and tear gas and arrested nearly 200 people as protesters took to the streets in defiance of sweeping security legislation introduced by China that they say is aimed at snuffing out dissent. The enactment and imposition of this national security law constitute a clear and serious breach of the Sino-British Joint Declaration, Boris Johnson told the House of Commons today. Johnson said the UK would stand by its pledge to give British national overseas passport holders in Hong Kong a path to UK citizenship, allowing them to settle in the country. Almost 3 million Hong Kong residents are eligible for the passport. There were 349,881 holders of the passport as of February. Hong Kong's autonomy was guaranteed under the One Country, Two Systems agreement enshrined in the Sino-British Joint Declaration signed by then Chinese Premier Zhao Ziyang and Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher. Hong Kong was handed back to China on July 1st, 1997, after more than 150 years of British rule, imposed after the UK defeated China in the First Opium War. China had never recognised the unequal treaties allowing British rule of Hong Kong Island, the Kowloon Peninsula, and the later lease of the rural New Territories. And Andrew, we've been watching this Hong Kong story unfold for some time, but China now seemingly not bothered about its treaty obligations to the people of Hong Kong, and is just imposing this law without any consultation with the Hong Kong administration. Do you think there's a way back on this? Do you think Britain can enforce the terms of that declaration from the 80s?
Well, at a time, Kenny, when the UK is removing itself from the kind of international associations which might have some degree of heft and weight to impress upon the Chinese administration the error of their ways, at a time when we are withdrawing from the EU, to be specific, I think it's extremely unlikely that the Chinese will pay any attention at all to whatever it is that Westminster and Johnson says. We see the Chinese very confident in their own borders. There was conflict on the Indian border, I think, 10 days ago. By accident, it is said, but that's the first time in a long time that there's been armed conflict there. And we see China flexing its muscles as well in terms of the administration and control of Hong Kong. I think China is now very clear that there is nothing that anybody could do about it. And I think we know also that despite the occasionally slightly contrary or controversial language that we hear from President Trump, I think the Chinese are confident as well that Trump couldn't organise any response either. So all we have is tiny post-imperial Britain squeaking on about a treaty that was signed 20 years ago, and the Chinese will pay not a blind bit of attention.
Sam, Chris Paton, the former, he was the last British governor of Hong Kong. He's talked about this today, and he made a really interesting comment, I thought. He said most of the people who run businesses in Hong Kong have another passport in their back pocket, and they perhaps should think a little more about those who work for them, who don't have the option of going elsewhere if it all goes wrong. There are, lots of people in Hong Kong who are just, trying to get by. People who perhaps were born, raised, grew up under the old system, which certainly wasn't perfect, but did offer a degree of democracy and freedom, now being trapped basically in the Chinese dictatorship. What do you think the British responsibility is here? Should we be offering everyone in Hong Kong British citizenship if they want it?
They should be. But the problem is, are they going to? Because I know today, kind of watching things escalate in Hong Kong, there was a reporter who was saying that there's so many people in Hong Kong who could not leave and come to Britain because of their age and when they've been born and things like that. So they're kind of stuck there, and they're the ones that we're seeing on the street who really need our protection. But the thing is Johnston is a joke. So the Chinese government know fine well he's not really going to do anything. So we don't, the UK doesn't have a strong government at the moment. They're basically a joke. I mean, even seeing a Chinese official today giving an interview, they were basically they're so confident in their ability and what they can do. Anything that the UK says is just, and the thing is, I mean, the first person to be arrested in this new law was a young man walking along the street, and he was stopped by the police and he was searched, and they found a Hong Kong independence flag in his his rucksack, and he was taken away. Now that faces up to a life imprisonment. I mean, a lot of these people still don't understand this new security law because of the way it's written. Yeah. And this is what they're saying. It's been written in language and terminology that they have never seen before in Hong Kong. They're not used to. So they don't quite understand this new law. But basically, if you say anything against Beijing at the moment, you're facing imprisonment, and it's just absolutely ludicrous. But China knows right now they can get away with it. You've got the UK, who should be able to do something with the treaty with Hong Kong, which is not powerful enough and basically a joke. And you've got America, who's got Trump, who's basically just as equally a clown. They know there's nobody there to it's got any weight. The only ones that have got any kind of weight at the moment probably is the European Union, and at the moment Britain's pulling away from that. So there's not much. I don't know what the answer's going to be with this one, and it's just heartbreaking to watch what's going on in Hong Kong right now.
Yeah, we will obviously.
Kenny, Sam's point about the stop and search that she saw this morning, of course, resonates here as well. We've seen as demonstrations and protests over the last few weeks in Scotland have been shut down. The police have imposed what are called Section 60 orders, which allows them to stop and search anybody there on site with no justification or suspicion. So I'm not for a second suggesting that the circumstances that the people of Hong Kong are facing are the same as we face in Scotland. I'm not. I'm just drawing a comparison that the imposition by the police of stop and search laws, fairly broad and unlimited stop and search laws, is something that governments around the world quite enjoy. And I think a second thing, it strikes me as really quite ironic that Chris Paton, of all people, is talking about circumstances where a pathway to ordinary Hong Kong Chinese people to obtain some rights to live and work in the UK are set out. My recollection is that Paton served for many years in Mrs Thatcher's administrations, and as we know, it was the Thatcher administrations who removed the rights of the Hong Kong Chinese to live and work in the UK in the first place. So I would suggest that what we're seeing here is the Chinese administration, who maybe have longer, better memories than those in Westminster at the moment, saying, well, the Tories took away these people's rights in the past, they're not going to give them back. This is just more spin, and there's no substance in this, so we won't pay any attention.
We will obviously keep an eye on that story as it develops. But back at Westminster, the SNP's shadow defence spokesperson has urged the Secretary of State for Defence to come before Parliament and address allegations that Russia offered Taliban-linked groups bounties to target UK and US troops in Afghanistan. The reports also claimed that the Trump administration received a written briefing as far back as February, and the SNP's Stuart MacDonald is now calling on the UK government to set out what it knew and when, what discussions it has had with counterparts, and reiterating calls for the Intelligence and Security Committee to reconvene without any further delay. Sam, if I could come to you, what do you make of this story? I mean, it's not been fully confirmed that this is true, but it does appear that Trump has been briefed about it, that you would expect then the information would have reached the ears of British cabinet members. What do you think we should be doing about Russia potentially paying people off to hunt down British troops?
Regardless of whether you agree with what the British troops are doing in Afghanistan, at the end of the day, it's someone's son and it's someone's daughter. And they know when they're signing up that they could potentially be in these situations, but at the same time, a lot of youngsters don't realise the full impact of what they're doing until they're there. And it's, as I say, it's someone's son and it's someone's daughter. And I would suspect that if the Trump administration have known about this and been briefed in this, Whitehall and Downing Street have known and been briefed about this. And there's got to be questions asked and there's got to be answers given, because at the end of the day, regardless, those are our kids. And as I say, whether you agree with Afghanistan or not, that is people's lives. And to be put bounties on anyone's life, as far as I'm concerned, is not acceptable. And for governments, I don't care what government it is, to knowingly know about that, if they did, is not acceptable in my book. So yeah, they do need to be questioned on it.
Andrew, Afghanistan obviously for many years has been a proxy conflict between Russia and Western forces. Do you see any resolution to this? Do you see any response going to be taken against Russia?
Well, certainly, I don't see any prospect of any response being taken against Russia. As I said at the top of the show, it's pretty clear that the American president is a confidant and cipher for Vladimir Putin. That is why, as we've been told, when Trump was briefed about this as far back as February, he did nothing, and that's why he will do nothing, because he doesn't want to do anything to upset Vladimir Putin. I think there are broader questions here as well. We've seen, as a result of the terrible incident in the Park Inn Hotel in Glasgow, representatives of Afghan refugees and asylum seekers protesting on our streets this week, and also pointing out loudly the ongoing difficulties which the proxy wars in Afghanistan have caused to the Afghan people, who have no particular interest in fighting with Americans or Russians or Brits for that matter, but have found their part of the world being repeatedly fought over for apparently strategic reasons. I'm not entirely sure why it's so strategic. It may be just that it's a part of the world that's far enough away that those who enjoy engaging in armed conflict find it's a convenient corner of the world to do it in. We did it through the Victorian era as part of the Great Game. The Russians obviously did it as they sought to impress people with their military power in the 1980s, and then we did. Then America and the UK did it to the Afghan people again. So I think the damage and destruction that has been wrought to Afghanistan over the years has been so significant that the reconstruction and rebuilding of that country is going to be a very major task. And I think at a time where we can see both the US administration and the UK administration enthralled to arms manufacturers, that the prospect of the conflict being de-escalated and serious and considered attempts being made to put money in and effort and thought into helping the Afghan people rebuild their country. So, for example, those who are seeking asylum and refugee status would not need to do so. But I think the prospect of anything serious being done in that direction is extremely slim, I'm afraid to say.
Well, we come back to Scotland now, and a new £1 million fund to meet the expenses of women experiencing complications with vaginal mesh implants has been launched today. Commenting on the launch, Health Secretary Jean Freeman said, "I welcome the opening of this £1 million fund to help support women who experienced complications after having vaginal mesh implanted in procedures carried out by or on behalf of a Scottish Health Board. We listened carefully to the views and experiences of the women affected when setting up the fund and have made the application process as straightforward as possible. We hope the fund will help those who experienced hardship as a result of the complications caused by mesh implants. Successful applicants will receive a one-off payment of £1,000 towards costs associated with emotional or practical support. We recognise the many distressing effects that mesh complications have had on women, and we have already taken strong and decisive action, including halting the use of transvaginal mesh, developing a case record review, and establishing a complex pelvic mesh removal service." Sam, now this scheme, it's not compensation as such, it's just a fund to make sure that these women have some cash to pay for some of the additional expenses that they might experience. Is this something that you would welcome?
The thing is, £1,000 is not a lot of money in today's setting. To even, get your case together, get all your paperwork, everything else, it's not a lot of money. I can understand the fund to help them then go through with their case and then get compensation, but these women, what they've been through already, I don't know. I can't really answer that one, Kenny. I just, I know that, in one sense, I want to say, yeah, this is really good, and it's really good the support's there for the women, but it's just really not a lot of money. I don't know what's the answer. I don't know what would be the answer to, as long as they're getting a lot of other support to bring their cases through in terms of counsellors and things like that. They need all that as well, not just cash.
Well, I mean, I believe the compensation process is still underway. This is just to help with other needs that these women might have. We move on just now, though. And diverse views from urban, town, rural and island communities must be heard if town centres are to be revitalised and renewed in the wake of the coronavirus pandemic, according to Community Secretary Aileen Campbell. Experts in town planning, public health, transport and business will take on board views of local communities to build on the progress of the Scottish Government's 2013 Town Centre Action Plan. Professor Lee Sparks of the University of Stirling will chair the expert group alongside members of COSLA, the Royal Town Planning Institute, South of Scotland Enterprise, the Carnegie Trust, the Federation of Small Businesses, Public Health Scotland, Sustrans, Inclusion Scotland and the Scottish Government. So, Andrew, is this the kind of thing you want to hear about the revitalisation of town centres in the post-pandemic world?
Well, I think, Kenny, certainly we've heard through the period of the coronavirus crisis that there have been a number of expressions of intention to use the opportunity to reset things. We can see, I'm in Edinburgh at the moment, and we can see that the City of Edinburgh have been taking steps to make some small changes across the city, which are intended to make life better for the community as a whole. And I think if this is some small step in that direction to continue to put some academic and industry expertise into the conversations and in order to drive them forward, then that's to be applauded. I think there's little doubt that the range of challenges which the urban areas and the town centres and city centres in particular have encountered across the country, they vary tremendously. From the collapse of the high street as shopping goes online, to the challenges of the banks withdrawing from the high streets as well and leaving cashless communities, and also the environmental challenges around about proper provision of integrated public transport which meets the needs of people in particular locations, be they rural, be they urban. And so I certainly it is encouraging to hear that a group as august as this is being brought together by the Scottish Government. Whether we see any actual progress is a different matter. I am sceptical about the ability to make significant changes at a time when economic activity is very flat and there are a number of other challenges in front of us. However, that there are plans being considered and drawn up is an essential first step, and so to that extent it's to be encouraged.
Yeah, we do always urge you, if you can, to buy as local as you can. That's the supporting local businesses with your money is the best way we can help to keep those town centres thriving. But Housing Minister Kevin Stewart has announced that Warmer Homes Scotland, the national scheme to help reduce people's fuel bills by making their homes more energy efficient, will restart today. As a result, over 300 staff employed on the programme have been brought out of furlough to start installing energy efficiency measures in people's homes. Mr Stewart said, "Our national scheme to help make more homes become energy efficient will restart on July the 1st, which should help to reduce fuel bills and provide vital support to those who have been struggling even more as a result of the COVID-19 lockdown. We want a Scotland where everyone lives in a warm home and where we have put an end to fuel poverty. By 2021, the Scottish Government will have allocated over £1 billion to tackle fuel poverty and improve energy efficiency, making people's homes warmer and cheaper to heat. I would ask people to please be patient while work resumes. Warm Works will contact people as soon as possible to confirm when their service will be restarted." And Sam, I know this was something that you've had on your mind recently. We did discuss this a wee bit on a previous show. Is this the news you were waiting for from Kevin Stewart?
Yeah, it's good to see it back up and running, which will help people with fuel poverty because it's something that we really, really need to tackle. The one thing I would like to see when this is now back up and running, because I believe it's back up and running today, is that it's not one size fits all, because the thing is with Scotland and our lovely geography, what may fit in one part of Scotland may not fit in another part of Scotland, especially here on the west coast. We've got a lot of damp weather, And whereas on the East Coast, I know when I used to live over there, and Andrew can correct me this, it was a bit, it was a more kind of fresher cold, a crispier cold.
Drier and often windier, yeah.
Yeah, whereas here it's a more of a damp cold. So they need to make sure they get that balance right, because not one shoe fits all when it comes to this. But anything to save fuel poverty definitely is a good one in my book, as far as I'm concerned.
Andrew, same question to you. Is this something you're welcoming?
Well, I won't disagree with Sam's meteorological analysis of Scotland, although I will point out it's been raining here in the east for the past 4 days. But her point's absolutely right. The solutions that this programme is supposed to provide need to be appropriate for the locations and the situations that they are being installed into. But the programme as a whole, as a matter of principle, is long overdue, and there's a clear and very significant need for the technology and the solutions which this program delivers into people's homes. As Sam is suggesting, it improves the quality of life in people's homes because they have proper heating. It also improves their lives because the proper heating that they have is now much cheaper to operate, and it improves all our lives because the carbon footprint generated as a result of the need to heat and dry homes in Scotland, the carbon footprint is being reduced. So those aspects of the programme which have always been there are undoubted and are to be encouraged. In addition, I think the First Minister made the point today, but it's worth repeating. The announcement that the scheme is restarting today indicates that progress with regard to the coronavirus crisis is being made, and I think from what the First Minister said today, at least 300 people will go back to work as a result of this announcement precisely. I presume there'll be a number of people doing administration, but we need to bear in mind that a lot of these folks who go back to work are skilled tradesmen who will not have been working very much through the coronavirus crisis. All the plumbers that I know have been doing emergency call-outs, and that's it. So to get back to get back to steady, planned, organised employment for these men and women is an important step forward. It's a small step, but it's an important step forward as well.
Absolutely. And finally tonight, Kirsty Blackman MP has announced that she is to step down as the SNP Deputy Group Leader at Westminster. Blackman, the MP for Aberdeen North, cited the impact of lockdown on her mental health and her desire to focus more on her family and her constituency work in a statement issued this evening. After 8 years on Aberdeen Council, Blackman was first elected to Westminster when she defeated Frank Doran in the 2015 SNP landslide. She was the only SNP MP in the North East to retain her seat in the 2017 election, after which she won the role of Deputy Leader. And as of the 2019 election, she holds the largest percentage majority of any MP in Scotland. And I would say, first of all, Kirsty has been a great friend to the show. She has been on the show a couple of times in the last few weeks. So obviously, hearing that the lockdown has taken such a toll on her, we do send her our very best wishes. Sam, I'll come to you first, though. What do you make of this, that Kirsty Blackman feels that the lockdown has taken such a toll on her that she wants to now just focus on her family rather than focus on being a political leader?
It's such a shame, and I wish her all the best. And but I can understand where she's coming from. We've been in lockdown and being at home with your kids and your family. In that, it kind of allows you to reevaluate what is important. I know I have been as a mum as well. But the thing is I think this shows how out of date Westminster is, and basically how out of date our democracy and politics as a whole is. We don't, we keep talking about we want more women to get involved in politics, we want more women to step up to the plate, but there's nothing in place to allow women to do that. And a lot of women are caregivers as well. There is men out there who are caregivers, but in terms of percentage, that's the majority of women. And you know, and the thing is when kids get ill, they tend to want their mum. A lot of the time, that's just one of those things. So yeah, it's just absolutely, we're so out of date. We need to bring it back up, bring it up to modern era. I doubt very much Westminster are ever going to do that. Crikey, dragging them into virtual parliamentarian debates and things on with virtual online was like dragging a toddler, you know, to go and wash their hands, you know, it was like kicking and screaming, you know. They really need to get up to date, because the thing is, this is how we lose a lot of really good politicians, a lot of strong women who are really good at looking after their constituents, looking after everyone else. And Kirsty, I mean, I've been on the show with Kirsty, and you know, and she's lovely and really good at what she does, and it's such a shame.
And Andrew, I mean, we mentioned just before the show started, I was reading an article from 2016 where Kirsty Blackman had to take her children into Parliament and had been chided for it, despite having few other options, because the way the Scottish school holidays fell before the English schools, obviously, her husband was unavailable, and it turns out that because she's not based in London full time, she can't even get access to the House of Commons nursery to look after her youngest. There is a real problem with the way the political system kind of chews up mothers, especially, isn't there?
Yes, there is. And certainly I would amplify Sam's point that all of us here are sending Kirsty the very best wishes that she gets the chance to recover. And I would also say that she gets the chance to recover and she gets the chance to continue as an MP. Mm-hmm. From the very brief political biography that you set out there, but as everybody knows, she has been an outstanding MP for her constituents and an outstanding MP for the people of Scotland, representing them in Westminster. As Sam says, that Westminster is fundamentally unable and unwilling to reform. A few weeks of virtual organisation, and now we're back to ballots that take hours to complete. And as we know, the attempts to reform the working practices and the working hours and the surroundings in Westminster have come to nothing. Actually, it strikes me very quickly that from the story at the top of the show, if Boris Johnson's £5 billion is build, I think the refurbishment works at the Palace of Westminster are scheduled to cost something like £4 billion, which kind of puts things into perspective a little bit. Yeah. But I think there is definitely a message here that Westminster makes people unwell, and Westminster doesn't serve people well. And I think there might be a message in that for the rest of the SNP MPs. To perhaps consider their participation in Westminster and to consider how we might better bring our political representatives back to Scotland, where their health will be better and they'll be able to do more for the people of Scotland.
Well, that is quite a note for us to end on, Andrew. Thanks very much for that. That is all we've got time for. So I'd like to thank Andrew and Sam for their participation tonight. Always have a lot to say and always worth hearing. We'd like to thank you for joining us as well, and we do come to the difficult part of the show. If you are able to support us financially, I do have to ask. If you can, please do go to broadcastingscotland.scot/register, sign up there as a supporter. Your £5 a month, first of all, helps us keep the lights on here, keep paying the rent on the studio, and then the more money we have, the more we can do to develop the quantity, quality and calibre of shows that we produce here. If you're not able to support us financially, we do understand. Shows will always be free to view for you online, but you can still make a big difference to us by spreading the word. Follow us on Twitter at Broadcast Scot, find us on Facebook, just search for Broadcasting Scotland, and then share the shows around with your friends, your family and anyone else that you know. Let them know why you watch Broadcasting Scotland, where we are, what we do, and why you think we're worthy of support. And finally, if you'd like to get involved here, I say this all the time, but there are lots of jobs to be done here, and we can't do them all ourselves. There's only a couple of us here in the building at any given time right now. Obviously, that will change as the pandemic clears, but we'd love to get more people in here. There's a lot of things we could do if we had more hands to get the work done. So please do, if you have any interest in getting involved in producing TV, get in touch with us and we will find a role for you. But that is absolutely all we've got time for tonight. I will be back on Friday with another special show, and then on Sunday with the full Scottish. Gordon, of course, will be back tomorrow with his regular Scotland at 7 slot. But until then, that is all we've got time for. Thanks once again to Sam Paton and to Andrew Wilson. Thank you for joining us. And until tomorrow night, have a great evening. Goodbye.